I am Venkatesh Ramakrishnan, journalist based in India. I have nearly 4 decades of experience as a journalist in multiple languages. I write both in Malayalam and English. I have covered national international affairs based in Delhi. I was associated with very many organizations, including the Hindu group of newspapers, which is one of the most predominant organizations of India. I have also worked along with the BBC, worked with the Telegraph, and many other smaller organizations and television channels and internet portals. So, in brief, this is my track record as a journalist, and I'm very happy to be here at Sharjah, this conference of the United Emirates News Agency. Thank you very much. Well, certainly there's been a kind of enhancement or a kind of increase in the volume of coverage that we have seen across the world on environmental issues. And interestingly, there is also growing awareness, public awareness on environmental issues. I think these are the two factors. One is the global concern on climate change and how it is impacting everyday lives. That's being felt by people and also being felt by the leaders of people, the governments of people. So they are all trying to kind of intervene and trying to kind of advance this dialogue on climate change. But even then, it is not very uniform. It is kind of there is a lot of imbalance in terms of the coverage. So I think there is a huge difference in Asia. If you look at there are certain places where coverage and awareness is fairly high, and there are places where it is not properly done. And of course, ultimately, there is also a lot of vested interests that come into play. Vested interests come into play at both levels. Like, for example, there are people who are kind of developmental fundamentalists, and there is also environment fundamentalists. So the point is, how as media organizations, I think, and media players, I think the responsibility of every media person would be to kind of strike a balance, looking at it comprehensively, looking at all the issues involved, and try to find out whether there is any kind of determinism at play, either at this side or that side. So that is the most important role that the media has to play in this context. Well, as far as I know, any form of journalism, it needs to kind of relate the consumer, the person who is kind of consuming the media, whether it is by form of print or whether it is form of audiovisual. It has to relate to his everyday life. Like, for example, if you talk about climate change issues in theoretical terms, say that this is what the world was like this at so many years ago. It's turned out like this, but related to his everyday life. Like, for example, there's a very interesting phenomenon that's happening across the world, and I think recently New York Times had a very interesting coverage on that. It looked at a situation where where in the monsoons, places in India, Sri Lanka have extreme climate differences over the course of a week. Like, for example, on day one, if the temperature is 43 degrees Celsius, the next day it rains and it falls to about 20-21. And then on the same day, there is a sudden change. There is a kind of lull in the rain, and temperatures shoot up to again to 35-40. So if you bring in these kind of everyday experiences, you cover them with some in-depth understanding, with discussions with environmental leaders and people who are environmental scientists, I think that would bring in kind of a greater that would have greater impact, and that would help people have greater awareness of these issues. There is only one way to do good journalism, that is to get beyond vested interests, but that is a very difficult job. It's not it is not very easy. The point is, there are even in the setting up of a media organization, there are considerable vested interests that come into play, and there are also considerable financial implications that come into play. So naturally, vested interest is something which is ingrained in any media venture. So I think as individual journalists, as people who are committed to the core values of journalism, which are objectivity, truthfulness, and the right of the people to know. I think we have to constantly look at ourselves and kind of question ourselves as to whether we are succumbing to vested interests or not, or getting over it. And constantly talking to oneself, constantly analyzing one's own behavior and contemplating. That is the only way to go forward. No, basically, the point is, it is not, you cannot specify as to one point or the other point. It has to, it is something which we face on a day-to-day basis. As practitioners, we confront this on a day-to-day basis. Like, for example, imagine a situation that there is an owner of a newspaper in India. He also has interest in, say, plantations, or he has interest in, say, mining. So then there is, obviously, the point is there is a conflict of interest that will come into play. Yeah. And the media owner at any given point of time, he would want to, look at what is of greater interest to him at that point of time. Whether it is business interests in other areas are important for him, or his interest as a media baron. Yeah. So I'm only talking hypothetically in a contextual manner. I'm not specifically. So I think this kind of pressures come. They are always there in any media organization, 24/7, 365. So that's why I'm saying it's a constant struggle. There is a constant need for introspection. Well, we look at all the global reports. We follow the COP summits very closely. We talk to environmental scientists on a regular basis, and we have a series of conversations on environmental issues, climate change issues, and then we also, as I was saying, we also go to the ground and look at the impact that climate change is causing in the lives of common people. That is a very important aspect that we are covering. So these are the basic resources that we are looking at. It is a combination of academic inputs as well as grassroots inputs. Yeah, I think it's a very important event, and basically this is also important because there is also this global imbalance in terms of climate change coverage, in terms of climate change emphasis that people are giving. See, this of course is common knowledge. I mean, every COP summit has kind of reflected this. There is always a kind of imbalance, and there is a weightage that is given to the point of view of the more developed Western nations. It's always there. So I think, COP in UAE and the kind of the discussions that we are going to have here would certainly help us kind of bridge this imbalance in a big manner and bring up the perspective of the developing nations in a much better manner.
Look, the role of the media in environmental and climate change is very critical, especially in African countries, more so the country that I come from, which is South Africa, because our audience particularly are people who live through the impacts of climate change, the impact of the environment, and as such, it must not be just about the agenda at international conferences about the climate change or about the environment, but it must be about the lived experience of our audience. I mean, in my country and other African countries, people are affected by floods, by droughts, and those are the kind of things that, as journalists, we are responsible and obliged to report on, and to also inform and educate the society, which is having to live with the burden of climate change. However, at the moment, unfortunately, is that with the decline of the media and also the decline in investment of the media, is that environmental journalism is taking a backstage, which is unfortunate, because of the cuts in budgets. But we're going to be forced as journalists to listen to our audience. We're going to be forced by the dire consequences of the impact of climate change to put environmental reporting on the front line. But also, in setting that agenda, it must be about the audience, engaging the communities who live through that. not just getting scientists or analysts who are talking at abstract philosophical level, but people who understand the immediate impact on their daily lives. No, I understand. That is why I always say you have a situation in most African countries because of poverty, because of development where basic socio-economic rise are regarded as the most important because are about the basics, are about having a house over your roof. I'm sorry, a roof over your head. About having food. About taking your children to school and having access to basic primary health care, as opposed to some things that other people see as green rights or luxury rights. However, that is why I'm saying that we have to redefine what we mean about environmental. It must not be about some idealistic factors, but about the very same things that will impact these people, in terms of that if we don't look after our environment, the flooding that they experience every 3 years or every now again, it's a result of that. The fires that they experience, the drought, the impact on their health, it's a result of what we do on our daily lives, what we do on a daily basis. So it's about how we as journalists, it's our responsibility to make environmental reporting not to be this abstract philosophy or rights, but that is why I was saying that it must be told through their lived experiences, because that's how they will understand, and that's how they understand the changing environment, as opposed to some journalists or scientists making it to be as if it's more esoteric scientific phenomenon, but it's not about how the communities live through it. The recommendation, like I said, I do have an environmental reporter in my newsroom. The recommendation is, do not just look at environmental reporting from the international climate change agenda. Do not be forced into the just reporting about the economics of climate change, but make sure that whatever you say, it is in sync with what the communities are experiencing, so that it's not just a luxury bit, but it's something that if there are going to be floods, they need to understand that they are the communities who have been in this environment longer than some of us. They need to understand. Actually, those are the experts. The communities are the experts who will tell you about how their land, how their environment has changed over the years. And to me, is that this is how we need to tell the story. This is how we need to redefine environmental journalism, and how the media should and must play a critical role. But it's about what you can do. If you're gonna, like I'm saying, that if you're gonna put it in that way, as to say, but this is caused by rich country producing a lot of emission, it's not going to sync with what people live every day. If you have been to Rwanda, you would know that it's one of the cleanest cities on the continent, and it's not because someone came there with a philosophy about the impact of cleaning, but it's because the community themselves took upon them. And to me, that's what I call impactful journalism. To say, if someone can relate to it, actually it becomes irrelevant. And that is why sometimes the decline that we see in the media is because of the fact that our telling of the stories is not as relevant as it ought to be.